Good morning. The Subcommittee on Research and Technology will come to order. Excuse me. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recesses of the Subcommittee at any time. Welcome to today's hearing entitled An Overview of the Fiscal Year 2016 Budget Proposals for the National Science Foundation and National Institute of Standards and Technology for Fiscal Year 2016. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biographies, and truth and testimony disclosures for today's witnesses. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. I would first like to thank our witnesses for appearing today to discuss these budget requests. Dr. France Cordova, Director of the NSF, Dr. David, okay, I'll get these names right here, Arviza, Chairman of the National Science Board, and Dr. Willie May, Acting Director of Nist, who I want to acknowledge has been nominated by the President for the position of Undersecretary of Commerce for Standards and Technology. The fiscal year 2016 budget request for NSF totals $7.72 billion, an increase of $379.34 million, 5.2% over the fiscal year 2015 enacted level. NSF is the primary source of federal funding for non-medical basic research. Basic research is about good jobs and a secure future. We want to be strong advocates for federal support of basic research that advances science in the national interest. But in this budget environment, just maintaining the current level of basic research support is a challenge. We have a constitutional obligation and a responsibility to ensure every dollar allocated for scientific research is spent as effectively and efficiently as possible. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on how NSF plans to prioritize and manage the funding in fiscal year 2016. The fiscal year 2016 budget request for NIST totals $1.12 billion, an increase of $255.8 million, or almost 30% from the fiscal year 2015 enacted level. The committee has a long bipartisan record of support for NIST and its contributions to research and development. Just last year, the House passed a bipartisan reauthorization of the Institute. A 30% increase will be difficult to achieve and would require significant changes in other areas. So we can keep that in mind as we have today's discussion. The requested increases would be devoted in large part to bolster advanced manufacturing initiatives at NIST. $150 million is requested for the Network for Manufacturing Innovation, which I believe is set in law at $5 million annually. We are here today to learn more about the justification for this request, and I'm appreciative of the opportunity to learn more about how fiscal year 2016 funds would be prioritized by NIST. I look forward from hearing our witnesses today and learning how priorities and budgets are set by both organizations. Now recognize our ranking member, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Lipinski, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and welcome to our distinguished panel here today. I'm pleased we're having this hearing to review the fiscal year 2016 budget proposals for the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Standards and Technology. There's a lot to cover when we discuss these two critical agencies, and I believe that we would have been better able to examine these budgets with two separate hearings, but I'm hopeful that we can give a thoughtful and thorough consideration here today. As many of you know, I have said many times from when I first came here 10 years ago how NSF and the role that this committee plays in overseeing NSF is one of the big reasons I wanted to serve on this committee when I got to Congress. And I want to thank both NSF and NIST for the great work that you're doing. The National Science Foundation is the only agency in our government that supports fundamental research across all fields of science and engineering. NSF has always been the primary source of federal support in a variety of fields, including the social and economic sciences. As other agencies such as DARPA and NIH have increasingly shifted toward more mission-focused and translational research, NSF has become the primary source of support for many more fields. $7 billion sounds like a lot of money, and of course it is. However, given the breadth and depth of our nation's scientific talent and their capacity to transform the world through scientific and technological breakthroughs, $7 billion still leaves a lot of excellent ideas on the cutting room floor. NSF is requesting a 5.2% increase in its budget for fiscal year 2016, which I believe is fully justified and I'm going to strongly support. I'd like to highlight a couple of items in the NSF request. I'm pleased to see the increase for the very successful Innovation Corps, also known as the I-Corps program. If my newer colleagues are unfamiliar with I-Corps, I urge them to get a briefing from NSF. Being from Chicago, I'm also interested in the Infuse initiative and the positive impacts research in that area could have on water quality in the Great Lakes. Today we're also looking at the budget request for Nist, the most important least known agency in our government, which has a budget of less than $900 million. Nist has always been the world's premier measurement science and standards organization. In recent years, policymakers in Congress and the White House have called on Nist to take on leadership roles in an increasing number of critical areas, including cybersecurity, disaster resilience, forensic science, and advanced manufacturing. On the one hand, it is a great compliment to Nist that we entrust them with these responsibilities and they continue to live up to our expectations. On the other hand, many of these responsibilities have been assigned without needed increases in funding, making it difficult for the agency to carry out its mission. NIST is requesting a 30% increase, but over a relatively small base. I fully support NIST's request in light of all the increased responsibilities. I hope that all of my colleagues will join me in urging full funding for NIST laboratories and construction budget. NIST infrastructure is 40 to 50 years old, and much of it is crumbling. As they face the same wave of retirements that many of our agencies face, NIST is struggling to attract top new talent. If we do not fully fund this agency, we may be compromising its abilities to remain the world's leader in measurement science and standards development. This would be a heavy blow to our economic growth and security, given the importance of NIST's work. Before I close, I want to say a few words about legislation that I expect will come before this committee soon in regard to reauthorizing both of these agencies. Last year, the agencies were not given the opportunity to testify on the reauthorizing legislation before we marked it up. I'm sure there will be some questions from both sides today that will be relevant to any new reauthorization bill, but it's important to allow these agencies to testify again once legislation has been introduced. This will allow our subcommittee and full committee to better understand the impact of any proposals for consequential policy changes. I look forward to this morning's testimony and discussion, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. Now, Chairman Smith, I recognize Chairman Smith, our chairman of the full committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and let me observe and state the obvious at the beginning that we have an excellent panel with us today, and we look forward to hearing from them shortly. The National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Standards and Technology support fundamental scientific research that is critical to American innovation and competitiveness. Our challenge is to set funding priorities that ensure America remains first in the global marketplace of ideas and products without misusing the American people's hard-earned tax dollars. For example, why does the administration increase funding for the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Science Directorate by over 7% while proposing an average of less than 4% for the Biology, Computer Science, Engineering, and Mathematical and Physical Science Directorates? But I do want to emphasize and mention and applaud the steps taken by NSF to improve transparency and accountability. NSF's new policy acknowledges the need for NSF to communicate clearly and in non-technical terms when the agency describes the research projects it funds. The new policy also emphasizes that the title and abstract for each funded grant should act as the public justification for NSF funding. It should explain how the project serves the national interest and is consistent with the NSF mission as set forth in the 1950 legislation that created the foundation. And I understand Dr. Cordova presented this at the November National Science Board meeting and received positive comments. It appears the new NSF policy parallels a significant provision of the first act approved by this committee last fall, a requirement that NSF publish a justification for each funded grant that sets forth the project's scientific merit and national interest. The reference to the 1950 original enabling legislation and its NSF mission statement is consistent with the first act, too. Nist does valuable, important work as well, which includes maintaining industrial and technical standards and managing cybersecurity guidelines for federal agencies. But the proposed 30% increase in the Nist budget for next year is unrealistic. Although there are a number of areas proposed for very large increases, the $150 million for the National Network of Manufacturing Innovation Program is of particular concern. Last year, with strong bipartisan support, this committee, the full House, and the Senate approved H.R. 2996, the Revitalize American Manufacturing Innovation Act, or RAMI. This bill authorized about $5 million per year for NNMI from Nist, with the bulk of the program funding to be transferred from the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy budget at the Energy Department's Office of Science. I don't know why the administration is ignoring the duly enacted RAMI Act. Other than that, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today on the subject that I mentioned above and yield back.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Smith. And now I recognize the ranking member of the full committee for a statement.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman, for holding this important hearing, and I welcome the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Standards and Technology witnesses here. Both are agencies that are central to the federal role in advancing science, promoting innovation, and creating a more prosperous nation. I look forward to hearing from the distinguished witnesses before us this morning. I only wish they could each have had their own hearing, because there's so much important topic to discuss for each of the agencies. I'm pleased with the budget requests for both the NSF and Nist. I hope Congress will have the wisdom to fully fund both requests. There are many worthy programs across the government, and we cannot fund everything. However, I believe that funding science and innovation should be an easy choice, but this is about our future. And even more important, it's about our children's future. That said, there are a few programs in the budget requests that I'd like to highlight. First, I'm pleased to see Nist and NSF's increased investments in engineered biology. Many of the experts believe that biology will be the driver of economic prosperity in the 21st century, as physics was in the 20th century. Mr. Sensenbrenner joined me in introducing the Engineering Biology Act of 2015, which would create a framework for coordinated federal initiative in engineering biology. I hope we have the opportunity to move the bill this Congress. Next, I'm happy to see Nist's leadership in the area of forensic science and standards. The partnership between Nist and the Department of Justice must continue to recognize Nist's critical role in developing technical standards for forensic evidence. The justice system must be just for all, including the wrongfully accused. I will be reintroducing my Forensic Science and Standards Act soon, and I welcome my colleagues to co-sponsor the legislation with me. Also, while public access is not addressed in the budget request directly, it is a timely issue. I am pleased to see that several agencies, including Nist, have released their public access plans for federally funded research, a process that this committee started back in the year 2009. Dr. Cordova, I understand you will still be negotiating with OSTP on your plan, and I encourage you to resolve that as soon as possible. Let me conclude with a few words about the debates in this committee regarding our support for different fields of science and for merit review. We all have beliefs we would hold very strongly, whether or not there is evidence to support them. Some of my colleagues believe very strongly that some fields of science are less valuable than other fields, and that some grants are less worthy than other grants. Personally, I do not presume to have the expertise to make that determination. I trust the merit review process, and I trust NSF to make those decisions. The experts before us today will have an opportunity to educate us as to why we must invest in all STEM fields and why it is so important to keep the merit review process free from political review. I just hope that all of my colleagues truly listen and consider what our witnesses have to say. I very much look forward to the testimony, and with that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Now, if there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I would like to introduce our witnesses. The Honorable Franz Cordova is the Director of the National Science Foundation. The Honorable Dan Arvizo is the Chairman of the National Science Board. And Dr. Willie May is the Acting Director of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. In order to allow time for discussion, please limit your testimony to 5 minutes, and your entire written statement will be made part of the record. I now recognize Dr. Cordova for 5 minutes to present her testimony.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Johnson, Madam Chairwoman, Ranking Member Lipinski, and members. I'm very pleased to be with you today to present the National Science Foundation's Fiscal Year 2016 budget request. I would like to begin my remarks with 3 short stories about breakthroughs in NSF-funded science in 2014. Dr. Danielle Bassett of the University of Pennsylvania was awarded a MacArthur Fellowship, often called a Genius Grant, for her NSF-sponsored work on how different regions of the brain interact. She uses MRI technology and computer algorithms in her research, which may ultimately lead to what she calls, quote, personalized therapeutics for rehabilitation and treatment of brain injury and psychiatric disorders. Her work may have application to Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, autism, epilepsy, and Parkinson's disease. Dr. Parina Guma's material science research at Suny Stony Brook has created a novel nanogrid that, when activated by sunlight, can break down oil from a spill. She was the first scientist to receive an I-Corps grant and has started a company based on patents from this original research. Dr. Jennifer Doudna of UC Berkeley was awarded a breakthrough prize by leading technology companies. Her inspiration, she says, was her father, a literature professor who introduced her to cryptograms. Today, she has decrypted bacterial immunity, and with that discovery, enabled the development of a precision genome editing tool, which could be used to treat diseases like cancer and AIDS, as well as hereditary disorders. At a recent session where I joined her to talk about future breakthroughs, she spoke of her experiences with K-12 students. There is a scientist in every child, she said. These young women scientists and their game-changing discoveries were all funded by NSF. They were all drawn into science by family, friends, or teachers at a young age. Their research is truly innovative and interdisciplinary and shows a commitment to the STEM workforce. NSF has a long history of funding research that leads to breakthroughs in science and engineering. These breakthroughs excite the next generation and generate promise for the future. NSF has funded 214 Nobel Prize winners, including the most recent winners, W.E. Murner in chemistry and Jean Tirole in economics. This past year, the NSF-funded supercomputer called Stampede at UT Austin has been used to explore a new method of DNA sequencing, which could make getting one's genome affordable. The new telescope in Chile, called ALMA, produced an iconic image of a proto-solar system forming around a relatively nearby star in our galaxy. This telescope is managed by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, located in Virginia. In addition, the NSF-funded Blue Waters supercomputer at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign is being used by researchers from the Mayo Clinic to understand gene expression in the brain, with an eye to better understanding Alzheimer's disease. How do these stories and examples inform NSF's future investments? In FY16, NSF proposes to uphold the essential approach that it has pursued for more than 60 years, to invest in discovery research and education in science and engineering, and by doing so, to address complex challenges facing the nation, for our nation. In FY16, there are 4 NSF-wide investments that address issues of major scientific, national, and societal importance. The first focuses on understanding the brain, and it will offer novel insights into how cognitive abilities develop and can be maintained and improved throughout people's lives. The second is focused on the discovery science needed to understand the complicated and interconnected food, energy, water nexus. The third area of emphasis in 2016 is risk and resilience. It focuses on the advances needed to address pressing challenges associated with extreme events and how we can be prepared for them. The fourth is to develop an integrated national effort to increase the participation of young people who have been traditionally underserved and or underrepresented in the STEM enterprise. What we're presenting today is therefore a robust investment in discovery. The total budget request is for $7.7 billion, a 5.2% increase above the current level. This request builds on the Foundation's strength in funding breakthroughs and discoveries across a broad range of fields and in educating the STEM workforce. My written remarks provide additional detail on these investments. Most of all, it continues NSF's tradition of funding great ideas and growing great talent, and ensures that NSF remains the place where discoveries begin. Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for your support of the National Science Foundation. I look forward to working with you as together we advance science in the national interest.
Thank you. And I now recognize Dr. Arvizo for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you. Full committee chair, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Johnson, Subcommittee Chairwoman Comstock, and Ranking Member Lipinski, and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate this opportunity to speak with you today in support of the National Science Foundation's Fiscal 2016 budget request. I'm Dan Arvizu, the Chairman of the Science Board, and in my day job, I'm the Director and Chief Executive at the Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory. The National Science Board, as you know, is the governing board of the National Science Foundation and an independent advisor to both Congress and the President. To begin, I'd like to take a few moments to comment on my colleague here, the National Science Foundation Director, France Cordova. Dr. Cordova has been at the agency's helm for almost a year now, and the board is very appreciative and impressed by her leadership. From day one, she has worked to ensure that the NSF supports and will be able to continue to support the strongest portfolio of discovery research in the world. She attends to both processes and to people, embracing the Foundation's efforts to enhance transparency and accountability and strengthen its workforce. And Dr. Cordova is a terrific ambassador, as many of you know, for the agency, connecting with other nations and scientists across all fields so that NSF can achieve its mission in advancing the frontiers of science. Chairwoman Comstock, this morning, on behalf of my 24 colleagues on the National Science Board, the science, engineering, and education communities, which I represent as well, I'd like to thank members of the subcommittee for their longstanding support of the NSF. The board takes very seriously our shared responsibility to provide strong governance and proper stewardship of this critical taxpayer investment. As you know, NSF is the only agency that supports fundamental science and engineering research across all fields, advancing the national interest by enabling scientific breakthroughs and the next generation of scientists and engineers. At the core, NSF is simple. We fund the best ideas. We proposed and evaluated by scientists and engineers throughout the country, and we do this in fact relying on a lean, dedicated workforce that's supplemented by rotating experts and volunteers and volunteer reviewers. This approach has delivered enormous value to the U.S. taxpayer and become part of the well-known international gold standard, as we like to say, that the Foundation has always worked to both protect and improve. NSF discovery science exists at the core of much larger national science and technology ecosystem. The early stage research that NSF drives lays the foundation for the application-oriented science pursued by other agencies. and the technological innovation developed by our nation's businesses. For example, 10 years ago, NSF invested in research on how to design and build a secure cyber infrastructure for the power grid. The DOE's Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability and the Department of Homeland Security have carried this research forward, and thanks to these successive investments, today the trustworthy cyber infrastructure for the Power Grid project is collaborating with national labs and utility sectors to improve the design, security, safety, and resiliency of the U.S. power grid. We're always looking to improve our processes, and as a result, NSF, as you know, the agency has implemented new policies to begin and to better communicate how awards serve the national interest, how management of the NSF's large facilities are managed as well, and the board and the director plan to jointly commission an external independent review to look at how NSF manages its cooperative agreements and to explore areas where we might make improvements to our procedures and processes. The National Science Foundation's 2016 budget request reflects a strategic commitment to support the best basic research, economic growth, job creation through innovation, and a globally competitive science and engineering workforce. The board believes that the proposal reflects the priorities set by the scientific community and a clear commitment to investments that will strengthen our nation over the long term. I particularly ask for your support for full funding of the agency operating and award management account. This request reflects the need to bring on additional staff to meet the requirements of the Digital Accountability and Transparency Act, cost-effectively supporting high-quality, transparent federal spending information. Like all Americans, the research community must make tough choices and set a priority, a challenge that my colleagues and I, along with the director, have embraced. Even in times of severe budget constraints, the board believes that the investment in our science and technology capabilities, including our S&E workforce, are essential to our nation's long-term prosperity and security. Our researcherships, observatories, have led to revolutionary technologies, Nobel Prizes, and even new states of matter, accomplishments that are a result of 65 years of a partnership among scientists, universities, the NSF, and Congress. Thank you for your leadership and for this opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And I now recognize Dr. May for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Sorry. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to present the President's Fiscal Year 2016 budget request for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, whose mission is to promote U.S. innovation and industrial competitiveness by advancing measurement science, standards, and technology in ways that enhance our economic security and improve our quality of life. The budget reflects NIST's important role in addressing the nation's top scientific and technical challenges that will indeed foster the innovation that creates jobs and strengthens the U.S. economy. Specifically, the President has proposed a budget for NIST of $1.1 billion, as we've heard earlier. This is a $256 million increase in the 2015 enacted level. The budget will support U.S. manufacturers, aid our communities in recovering from disasters, and improve the ways that we connect to the world around us, from online banking transactions to using technology to effectively and efficiently manage the smart grid, to support the implementation of smart cities. The largest portion of the requested increase, $194.4 million, focuses on U.S.-based manufacturing. This includes research in NIST labs, support for the Hollings Manufacturing Extension Partnership, MEP, and a new request for the National Network for Manufacturing Innovation, or NNMI. The NIST laboratories represent the core of our mission. Our researchers conduct world-class research that advances the nation's technological infrastructure and helps U.S. companies continually improve their products and services. The basic research in the NIST laboratories has garnered 5 Nobel Prizes over the last 18 years, a Kyoto Prize in Materials Science, 2 National Medals of Science, and over 100 other national and international scientific awards and prizes. Nist conducts more applied research in the standards area in areas of national and global importance, including but not limited to cybersecurity, advanced communications, advanced manufacturing, advanced materials, and strengthening the science that underpins the forensic data and information used to make decisions in our criminal justice system. The FY16 budget request for our standards and technology research services account is for $754.7 million. This is an increase of $79.2 million over the 2015 budget. And this is to grow our capacity in advanced manufacturing, cybersecurity, and privacy for our nation's growing digital economy and for the fundamental measurement science and technology that is critical to U.S. innovation and improved quality of life. The increase will also provide for continued operation of our world-class Center for Neutron Research and will strengthen our efforts to support the nation's community disaster resilience programs. Madam Chairwoman, Nist Industrial Technology Services Appropriation supports our external partnership programs designed to enhance American innovation and global competitiveness through partnerships at the state and local level. For our ITS account, the FY16 request is for $306 million. That's a $167 million increase, and we recognize that. $150 million of that would support the establishment of the NMI that we've heard about, envisioned to be a globally diverse set of regional hubs coordinated by NIST to accelerate the development and adoption of new cutting-edge manufacturing technologies. The major portion of this amount is to establish 2 manufacturing innovation institutes to address the advanced manufacturing needs identified by industry. The 8 institutes that have been identified to date are focused on U.S. government agency needs, namely those of the DOD and the DOE. The ITS report also supports an $11 million increase, $11 million to increase the ability of our MEP centers to serve small, rural, and young companies. Our construction budget request is for $59 million. It represents an $8.7 million over 2015. Simply put, the aging and deteriorating buildings and infrastructure on our 2 campuses are beginning to threaten our ability to accomplish our mission. Ms. Chairwoman, the NIST labs play a unique role in the nation's research and technology development enterprise. We sit at the nexus of the science and industry, conducting cutting-edge, world-class science and developing standards that will allow industry to innovate and compete successfully. Both our labs and our extramural programs are clearly focused on providing the tools to allow U.S. manufacturing to experience a renaissance of technological leadership. Thank you for inviting me to testify today, and I will be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our witnesses. Appreciate having you here today, and now we're going to have 5-minute question rounds, and I will recognize myself initially for a 5-minute round. I'm following up on really what all of you talked about in some regard. Could you give us a little bit more detail on the role that private industry plays in terms of creating and retaining science and engineering jobs and how versus the public, and how the money that we are spending can then leverage that private money? I think you all spoke to that a little bit, but if maybe we could detail that a little bit more, and how can we ensure that we're targeting our resources into areas that will leverage and create these new 21st century jobs that we all are very committed to expanding?
I'll be happy to start, Madam Chairwoman. So just two comments. One is that, as you know, NSF has a very strong STEM workforce investment. And we, especially at the undergraduate and graduate level, but also in K through 12, and really the whole spectrum of training for science and engineering careers. And my experience as a university professor, being very close to the students and close to their passion for getting a job and contributing to the economy and being happy, was that the business, private business, was very, very interested in our students because of the skill sets that they got when they were at the university. And most of our students had the opportunity to participate because of funding of places like NSF and Nist in science and engineering along with their faculty members. And this was just excellent training.
In terms of internships and things?
Absolutely. Internships for the summer and engineering programs. There are internship programs for a whole year. So that's one aspect of this investment. And the other is that NSF, I did a broad survey of the partnerships that our agency has with private industry, and we have over a couple of hundred partnerships, maybe even more than that, across the whole spectrum of dollar funding that really leverage our federal investment with private funding. And sometimes that is on workforce and investment in students and university, say centers, engineering centers, industry university research centers that we fund. And sometimes it's in the actual science and engineering programs themselves. So we are, I think we're very good partners. We have an emphasis this year in particular on accelerating the numbers and kinds of partnerships that we have with the private sector.
Thank you.
If I may just add slightly to that, I'll be brief. I mentioned the ecosystem of the nation and how NSF supports fundamental research that ultimately finds its way into the marketplace. There's probably nothing better than a few examples to describe kind of how that might occur. And so I've got a couple that I think might be useful. I'll just focus on one. NSF has sponsored fundamental research on synthetic chemistry and transforming positron emissions topography, PET imaging, which is an important new technique. And an NSF-funded chemist, Stephen DiMagno, discovered how to create some organic compounds rapidly and efficiently. After that, PI was recognized and went through the I-Corps program that NSF sponsors, along with SBIR, which is a special grant. That has resulted in ground floor pharmaceuticals from Lincoln, Nebraska, a company that produces radio tags for this kind of imaging, and they've recently signed an exclusive license with Massachusetts General Hospital, which will give rise to a whole suite of new diagnostic techniques in a competitive manner, and allowed there to be that fundamental work that was done to provide a great opportunity for an expansion of things that really, I think, offer great and wonderful applications in the marketplace.
Great.
I think each of us is going to answer this a little different, so here's my spin on this. When I came to Nist 43 years ago, we had 3,000 employees. We had 3,300. Today, with all of the new assignments and the growth in the organization, we have 3,000 employees less than we had then. But we have 3,500 associates. These are people who work on our campus almost on a daily basis that are not federal employees that we interact with. So we've changed our interaction platform considerably. We have associates from industry, from academia, from other government laboratories, some foreign laboratories. A large portion of those are with our students, postdocs and students who spend time on our campus. We are also gaining new capabilities that we need to carry out our mission and do some of the newer activities that I heard many of you speak about through something called joint institutes or centers of excellence that we are establishing with the university sector. So as we are growing our program, addressing the new challenges that we're being asked by the administration, the Congress, and industry to take on, we're not doing that by hiring more federal employees. We are doing more collaborations and using the talents in the university system and in the private sector to work with us to deliver our mission.
Okay, thank you. And I would ask any of you if you have additional examples, because those examples are always very helpful for us to really have those object lessons on how this is impacting. So thank you. And my time is up, but I did want to, and maybe for the record, ask about regulatory and reporting burdens that might you know, we've heard that from the universities and researchers, and any of those things that might limit your ability to target the resources to the best use, and if you would like to identify any of those for us for the record. So now I will recognize Ranking Member Lipinski for his questions.
Thank you. I want to start with Dr. Cordova, and I have a number of questions. Hopefully we can have a second round and maybe get through a couple here. But Dr. Cordova, I know you've been actively engaged on improving transparency and accountability at NSF, and I want to thank you for that. I want to join the chairman in thanking you for that, because all of us want to make sure that the research dollars are being spent in the best way possible. I want to give you an opportunity to explain to the members, especially the new members on the committee, just what you are doing that is new for transparency and accountability.
Thank you, Member Lipinski. So we have been very engaged in enhancing our transparency and accountability processes since I came 11 months ago to the agency. And the first thing I want to do is just thank Chairman Smith and the members of the overall committee for moving us more in that very important direction. It was definitely the right time, and we want to be very responsive. We completely agree that this is very, very important, that the public understands the investment that this country is making in science and engineering and STEM education. So as of last May, we instituted some new practices which on transparency and accountability, which focused on clarifying, communicating better the titles and the abstracts of proposals. Those two things were on line for all proposals. And having a non-technical description, which would clearly say what the proposal's goals were about in clear English, and also what is the potential impact of the research and how it serves the national interest. And so that was the order of the day as of last May. As you can imagine, this is a big change. We get over 50,000 proposals a year, from which we select about 11,000. So it's a big, complicated engine that works on the whole merit review process. So we then instituted our practices into guidance, which came out at the same time as the OMB uniform guidance, so that they come out together. We changed our manuals, which are both internal for program officers doing the overseeing of the review process, and another one for the external community, so that they could see what the expectation was. And so the effective date of all these changes, I would like to call January 1st of 2015, that we will really see a difference in what is being done and how it looks to the public and how the proposals are being reviewed. On top of that, we have training, new kinds of training for the program officers and division directors that really do the bulk of the merit review process. And it's basically it's a cultural change for the agency. And as you know, Representative Lipinski, culture change takes a while to take hold. And so, but all the assistant directors who are sitting behind me are just firmly committed to this, each in their own disciplinary area. And I expect that we'll see some real changes here. I also should add, I sent a so-called important notice, which is sent very rarely. I've only sent out one as NSF director so far, to all the university presidents, letting them know of these changes. And we have a website, of course, for further clarification. We have working groups internally. Every speech that I've made, I would say every speech that I've made for the last few months has included a description of our efforts in this regard.
Thank you very much. I know as a former academic how tough cultural change is. I don't have much time, but I want to throw this question out. SBE, the Social and Behavioral Science and Economics Directorate. Can you, Dr. Cordova, can you talk about how important that is to solving grand challenges that we have in health, energy, education, national security, cybersecurity, and so many other things?
So the social and behavioral and economic sciences are incorporated when I go around my university visits, and I just came back from visiting a few universities and research centers in the country, are incorporated into really everything we do and think about as scientists and engineers. So there are lots of centers, some of which have been funded by NSF, some by other agencies, and some by the universities themselves, or all of them. And they invariably include social and behavioral and economic scientists now, because they're trying to address some grand challenges that face our country and our world. And they realize the importance of having the social and behavioral sciences there to inform. And let me just give you one example for Chairwoman Comstock, that there's the Arizona State University, there's a big biodesign center that embraces lots of particular kinds of research around, that incorporates physics and biology and so on. They also have, as an integral part of that, a center called Nanoscience and Society, which everyone goes through, all the other centers connect to evaluate, if you're thinking of a new concept in nanotechnology, or really any of the bio and physical sciences, what could be the potential impact, and what are the ethical and legal and kind of public considerations for how that technology could be used. And I was told that sometimes scientists just actually make a pause and head off maybe in a different direction based on being informed by social and behavioral economic scientists sitting at the table with them and looking at the potential impact of what they're developing and their new technological approaches.
Okay.
Thank you. I thank the Chairwoman for indulging me here.
Great. And I now recognize Chairman Smith for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Cordova, let me say at the outset that that was wonderful to hear your three examples of the breakthrough winners dealing with treating diseases and oil spills and the brain. And you quoted the individual, I think, who won the award for treating diseases, as saying that there is a scientist in every child. That is a wonderful quote. I intend to plagiarize that in the future. But I think it does point to, frankly, responsibility we all have, and that is to make the study of science more interesting to young people, and that's the subject of another hearing, but that certainly should be a goal of ours in lots and lots of ways. Thank you, too, for mentioning the supercomputer at University of Texas. I only wish I'd become chairman of the committee a few years earlier so I could have taken more credit for that supercomputer, but they're pleased with it and it's doing a lot of good work. I'd like to address my first couple of questions and to you and ask about your policy, which I appreciate and which you mentioned a few minutes ago as well. And I just want to make sure that I understand the policy and see if you feel if the National Science Foundation policy is compatible and agreeable to the similar provision in the First Act. I'm not asking you to endorse the First Act, but just to focus on that provision that's parallel.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for, and Mr. Lipinski, for raising the important issue of greater transparency and accountability. Your legislative provision, I think it was Section 106 of the First Act from the last Congress, which focuses on the national interest, is very compatible with the new NSF internal guidelines and with the mission statement of NSF, which I quote, to promote the progress of science to advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and to secure the national defense. Right. We share the same goals and believe that these policies, transparency, accountability, the national interest, are to be found in the 1950 law that created NSF and established our mission. And so we likewise thought it was important and appropriate to add the explicit reference to the national interest in our revised guidelines.
Okay. And you, I assume, then support the language we have in the First Act that deals with that particular subject?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Avizu, as chairman of the Science Board, do you concur with that? I shouldn't ask you if you agree with Dr. Cordova, because that's not fair, but you agree with the idea that the provisions in the First Act that we're talking about and the NSF policy that Dr. Cordova has been promoting, and when we appreciate that, are compatible and similar, and you support the language in the First Act as well?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Smith, for the questions and for asking our input on that. I think I can speak with that reservation that my colleagues and I on the board, I support the goal that's clearly articulated in this section, and we agree that wards that NSF makes need to be able to support the best ideas and fulfillment of the mission that was essentially just quoted by Dr. Cordova. And we like the whole quote, which includes and other purposes. But I think the main thing to say here is that we concur with her assessment of the changes that are being made. So I want to thank you for your leadership.
And again, it goes beyond agreeing with the goal. You agree with our language as well, and you support the language we have.
Yeah, I think, again, we'll offer the opportunity to offer additional input to make and strengthen that.
Dr. Cordova said she agreed with the language. Don't you as well? Or?
Well, we agree in principle that this is actually meeting the goals that we're trying to accomplish, and I think it's probably best to wait until the language actually comes out. But with what I've seen so far, I think we can agree with that language.
Okay, thank you very much. I have two other questions. Let me come back to transparency and accountability, because I want to ask you, Dr. Cordova, what you think needs to be done yet. But before I get there, you had a question a while ago about the SBE Directorate. Do you consider the SBE Directorate any more important than the other directorates? I mentioned in my opening statement that SBE got a 7% increase. The others, biology, computer science, engineering, mathematical, and physical science directorates got less. Do you think SBE is there more important than the other directorates? Why should it get a greater increase than the others, if it should?
Chairman Smith, those are two different questions. The reason why they have a bigger increase is in large part because of the funding, the increase in funding for the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, which is within
if you take
SBE.
That out, then what's the increase if you take that out?
Well, let me just ask Mr. Sievers behind me, what's the increase if we take out the center? Because that center, of course, is the basis for the science and engineering indicators, and the Congressional Research Service depends on the statistics.
While that is being determined, if I can, let me just ask you to elaborate, because I know you're doing some positive things in this regard, and that is what remains to be done in the areas of transparency and accountability. I know you're making some changes, and I didn't know if you wanted to elaborate on those or not.
I think improving communication is always important when you're making cultural change, and so that people understand clearly what the expectations are. I think we'll have a lot of work to do internally, which we would like to share with the external proposing community on writing non-technical descriptions of the research. This will be this kind of a new adventure for some, not for all. And so rather than, as you know, the number of proposals has, over the last decade, has increased tremendously, and the number of FTE have not. So workload is a consideration. So we'll have to figure out, and we are trying out new pilot programs and merit review, including virtual panels and all the rest of it, to try to have the merit review process itself be efficient and effective. And this is all part of it, is communicating how we do this work in that overall context.
Thank you, Dr. Cordova. My time is way over. And do you have a quick percentage? And here comes the answer. You feel like you're, oh, not yet? Okay.
For the record. We will submit it for the record.
Okay, we'll look forward to getting that.
That's the answer.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I now recognize Mr. Tonko for his questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to all of our panelists. The information feed is awesome. I represent the capital region of New York, which has been dubbed by many to be one of the strongest hubs of growth, job growth, in the clean energy, innovation, high-tech economy. And with that, we have great organizations like Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and the corporate headquarters of GE with a lot of their innovation that they're incorporating, and the Polytechnic Institute. So my desire is to continue to build the foundation to further underpin that regional economy and certainly the nation's economy with this growth that is so important. By the two agencies that you speak for today, I'm really impressed by the work that you do. So my focus is on the National Network for Manufacturing Innovation, the NNMI effort. Dr. May, can you discuss the level of demand for additional institutes under NNMI, and what area of focus do you envision for those future institutes?
Well, there is a lot of pent-up demand. There is more than 135 needs that have been identified by Nist. And as I said earlier, there are 8 institutes that have been stood up, and they are mainly stood up to address the needs that were coherent with the needs of the Departments of Defense and the Departments of Energy. What are the specific needs that we will address? Once when and if we have funding in 2016, we'll begin a process to winnow down those unmet needs and have plans to move forward and establish 2 institutes going forward, and then begin processing those needs that we have, allowing additional input, obviously, and then set up a plan for setting up additional institutes in the out years.
Thank you. I'm a solid advocate for additional funding for those innovative concepts. When making a selection for a new institute, what other factors are given consideration? Is geography, for instance, taken into account, or any prioritization for legacy cities that are transitioning from an older industrial reliance to perhaps a new day for that comes via advanced manufacturing?
Excuse the analogy, but we are looking to pick the best horse and the best jockey. Well, we don't care where that horse and the jockey comes from.
I represent Saratoga, so I understand the language. I understand that language very well.
So we expect to make merit-based decisions.
Okay, I appreciate that. And to Dr. Cordova, again, welcome. My district includes the Stratton Air National Guard Base, which hosts, as you know, the 109th Airlift Wing in Scotia. And I'm proud of the fact that this year we share in the 27th year that the 109th Airlift Wing has been supported by the National Science Foundation's Antarctic program as part of Operation Deep Freeze. Over the past few months, the Guard flew 241 missions, delivering more than 3,000 passengers and 4.5 million pounds of cargo. Can you provide a brief update on NSF's polar research?
With respect to the 109th, I can provide what the investment is for both Arctic and Antarctic.
Okay,
yes,
that's
yes,
fine.
and then more globally, polar research. Whatever your particular questions are, I'd be happy to do that. So we have the Arctic research. The expenditures for 2014 were approximately $2.5 million. And we expect to spend the same in 2015. Spending for the 109th for the Antarctic program were about $29 million in the last fiscal year. In this fiscal year, they'll increase to $31.5 million due to higher personnel and aircraft maintenance costs. And by the way, Representative, we're pleased to be part of that cargo as well.
Thank you.
That's really a wonderful contribution to our overall program. We depend on the logistics of the Department of Defense.
And further, do you see any future plans to modernize the polar program's aging equipment and aircraft?
Since we get the aircraft support from a different agency, that is really a question I think that's appropriate for them. We are looking at substantial modernization program for the ground support, which of course services the aircraft, the landing bases and so on. And we are heavily engaged in preparing a modernization proposal for the coming fiscal years that is in response to the Blue Ribbon Committee known as the Augustine Committee. It's desperately needed after so many decades.
Thank you. I see my time is out. Just let me throw a thank you out there for the focus on STEM education. We're working via some legislation that I've authored that I hope will continue to bolster our efforts in STEM. And with that, I thank you and yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tonko. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Dr. Cordova, at one point, the National Science Foundation had over $1 billion in expired grant money. Is that still the case?
I have no idea, Representative. Does we will certainly supply that response for the record, but
okay.
I don't.
Well, one of the reasons I ask is that when you have you're under a time limit, that can create some incentives to fund projects that I would say the public would find questionable in terms of scientific research. For instance, I believe you funded a grant to study the gambling habits of monkeys at $171,000. You spent $856,000 on teaching lions to run on treadmill. And I'm just wondering if what the rationale would be for funding some of those projects, because as a member, we get some pretty intense criticism, particularly in such a tight budget environment that we're living in right now.
I understand the question. I don't know about those proposals. We can certainly get back to you on that detail, but this really goes to our discussion earlier, Representative, on the transparency and accountability, and we just have to be better at communicating what are the goals of research and what are the potential impacts, because sometimes things that sound obscure can actually be just absolutely revolutionary and groundbreaking, as you know. We like to point out that the original proposal that turned into Google was called Backrub. Now that would be something that would catch your eye, would it not? And
I'd be interested.
Yes. But you see the point, and that's why we really need good titles and non-technical descriptions, and that makes everybody stop and pause and say, yes, what are the goals and what could be the impact for society.
Thank you. Also, could you update us on your decision to relocate the headquarters to Alexandria and explain some of the factors that are causing a delay in that move?
Yes, of course. So we are in the process of moving to Alexandria. We should have the shell of the building all completed, I'm told, by this fall. And so our budget for the relocation effort includes some systems, IT systems, and some furniture consistent with having that all ready by FY16. About the delay, we were told by GSA that they had accepted the proposal of Alexandria to move there. And I believe that was in the summer of, before this summer in 2013. And then we reached an impasse with the union on what in particular, the office space size would look like. And that went to the Federal Impasse Panel in the late spring, and we got the response in the fall on how that would settle out. And so we have been working we are following the guidance of the Federal Impasse Panel. And actually, we are able to, because of the hard work of the team, a very talented team, which I assure you is on this constantly, we are able to actually be cutting substantially in time delay the initial projections of how long this impasse would lead us to be delayed, Representative. And so this situation has actually got worse and now is improving substantially, and we're hoping to bring this as close to as we possibly can by making compromises.
Let me throw this in real quick. You asked for almost $31 million to fund the move. Does that include a potential cost as a result of the delays?
No, it doesn't, because those would be in 2017, the delays.
Well, thank you all for being here. I'm fascinated with the work you're doing, particularly the quantum-based information. Dr. May, my time's expired. I now yield to Ms. Esty.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the chairman and ranking member for today's hearing, and to the three of you for the tremendous work you're doing every day and for being so informative for us and ensuring that our country maintains its position as the leader in research and development, really, for the world. Dr. Cordova, you had spoken about NSF's risk and resilience initiative, so I want to hit your topics 3 and 4, risk and resilience and STEM education. So starting with the first one. Living in Connecticut as I do, and we are seeing the effects, still seeing some of the effects from Superstorm Sandy and Hurricane Irene, we are acutely aware of the impact that is having on our economy as we see in more and more extreme weather events. And we're seeing it again with sub-zero temperatures almost into March now. Could you speak a little bit further about what NSF's goals are in focusing on risk and resilience? And as a follow-up, as someone who serves on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, where we're also looking at these issues, can you let us know whether you'll be working with other agencies, including particularly FEMA and Department of Transportation, as part of these initiatives?
Yes. So risk and resilience is one of the 4 cross-directorate initiatives that we're putting a focus on for the FY16 budget, just because of what you said, Representative Etsy. We have been experiencing significant events that are natural as well as human-made, but mostly natural events. And we just feel that we have to put in investment in basic research so that we can be prepared for those events. The FY16 request includes $8.5 million for a cross-directorate program that is called Critical Resilient Interdependent Infrastructure Systems and Processes. So we call it CRISPA for short. It further goes a step further than our other programs that enable research on earthquakes and winds, to include being resilient to all kinds of hazards like tornadoes and storms and so forth. It focuses on multiple interconnected systems like electrical power, water, gas, roads, and communications. And as you know, we have to consider all of these as a system to be truly prepared and resilient. We do, of course, work with other agencies on this, and I don't know the details about what their investments are, but we could describe our particular programs and where they come into this, but this is something that concerns all the other agencies. So I think our unique contributions are in a systems approach that brings in engineering as well as basic science and the social sciences too, because as you know, you can be told that a tornado is coming, but if you don't have the right social preparedness among agencies on the ground and the mayor and the police force and respond to crises appropriately, lives can still definitely be lost. And so to make us more resilient, because we embrace all the sciences and engineering, we figure we can do a lot of basic work. And also in computer modeling, we've mentioned throughout this testimony that we have these big supercomputers, and those are really working very hard, and I've gone to see the efforts that they're doing on risk and resilience to really model the interactions of all the different components, social and natural.
Terrific. That's very helpful, and I'm pleased to hear about that systems-wide approach, sort of an ecosystem of utilities as well as transportation, critical infrastructure, which is also our schools and our core institutions. I was struck by your testimony and highly supportive to hear you quote "There is a scientist in every child." So I wanted to give you an opportunity to expand a little bit on the Includes initiative. I've been doing an enormous amount of work in my district on ensuring that every child, particularly that young women and children of color, have an opportunity to get excellent STEM skills in each and every one of our schools and can see themselves as future engineers, scientists, researchers. So can you tell me a little bit about what you're doing, how are you collaborating with stakeholder communities? Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Esty. The Includes is something that is very personal effort to me. In fact, I've nominated myself team captain for this effort. We spend, just if you look at the Congressional Research Service report, we do make a great investment in what we call broadening participation, which is another way of looking at inclusion. We have focus programs, we have emphasis programs in different areas. And as we go around the country, and I do make lots of on-the-ground looks at our efforts, we notice that they can be very brilliant in their local ecosystem, but what we've learned from them and the best practices are often not communicated to other potential groups and communities that want to do similar work. So this emphasis, and I think the small amount of money that we've requested here leverages that huge investment that we're already making. And this emphasis is on communication of those best practices. It's on networking. It's really almost a systems engineering approach, and that's why the assistant directors that are all sitting in this room it is the goal that they're most excited about, because they realize that who's sitting in the seats in our universities, that the engineers of the future should be a critical concern to us to tap into our national talent. So we're enthusiastic. We'll embrace lots of communities. We believe that this is a whole community effort. It starts when you're born and ends when you leave us. And we want to take advantage of all the talent and excitement and interest around there and have different approaches to this challenge.
Terrific. Thank you very much. And I see my time is way expired, but we appreciate your commitment on all of these issues. Thank you so much.
I now recognize Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Cordova, welcome back to the committee.
Oh, welcome back from Antarctica.
Thank you. Great trip. Thank you. As you've heard today in this committee, and as you frequently hear, so much of what the NSF does is important to our country's future, and there are so many important priorities in your budget. I'm glad to see on behalf of my constituents in Oregon, I'll name just a few that are important: clean energy technology, secure and trustworthy cyberspace. In fact, at the state level, we're working with our institutions of higher education and industry on a Center for Cyber Excellence. STEM education, thank you for your passion on that issue. As a member of the Education Committee, there's so much we can be doing. And then, as you discussed with my colleague from Connecticut, Ms. Esty, risk and resilience. On the West Coast, we have different issues from the issues they face in Connecticut. However, my constituents are very concerned, of course, about natural disasters being on the Cascadia subduction zone. But I wanted to ask you, Dr. Cordova, about a particular issue that currently the Oregon State University is leading an effort to design a regional class research vessel for NSF, and will be operating the first of these new vessels that is built. We're very fortunate to have this opportunity in Oregon, not just for the university to have that experience of designing a vessel, but also for the potential of what we can learn through the observations made possible by this equipment. So I was a little concerned because there was a recent survey conducted by the National Academies that recommended some reduced funding for operations within the ocean sciences facilities budget. So can you give us an idea on how a rebalancing of funding within OCE might influence plans to continue development of this new vessel?
Thank you, Representative Bonamici. And let me just first say that I'm just so impressed by your method as a congresswoman. When we were on the Antarctica trip, you were so committed to the students in your region that you were constantly doing very special videos and a whole series to bring back to the classroom. You're a role model. So
thank you. And I just went out to the school and did a presentation before I came back to D.C., and they were thrilled.
So on the regional class research vessels, so you're right. This is an opportunity. I mean, ocean observing and understanding 70% of the planet and what's in there and how it functions with in a whole world system is incredibly important research. So there is an intense study at NSF on how many regional class research vessels are needed and appropriate for the future. We completed the preliminary design review for this program in August of 2014, and we presented it as an information item at the February National Science Board meeting, and it's being considered right now for presentation as an action item at the May National Science Board meeting. And then the next step would be, if it were put in front of the NSB, to request approval for the advancement to final design phase and inclusion in a future budget request. Now, you mentioned the Decadal Panel. Okay, so that's wonderful. Then the Decadal Panel, as you know, just came to us at the end of January. And so that a preliminary report was made to the board. Hasn't been fully digested by the agency. As you know, we are a very thinking agency, and we study things very closely and all the potential impacts. And we like to say we set our priorities based on community input. And so here, as you've pointed out, Representative Bonamici, there are lots of different kinds of input. So that is being assessed, and we'll make a decision.
Terrific. That sounds promising, and I look forward to keeping in touch on that. I wanted to get in a question for Dr. May. Thank you for your testimony. I look forward to having you visit the Collaborative Life Sciences building at Oregon Health and Sciences University. We're doing some great work out there. Our Life Sciences building is a great partnership between OHSU, Oregon State, and Portland State to expand their research activities and really offer a new approach to healthcare education. So I look forward to your visit. The Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program has really done a lot of good in Oregon, leveraging federal funds in conjunction with state and local funding support. I wanted you to address, of course, the importance of growing American manufacturing. How can this budget proposal support a renewed focus on American manufacturing, especially through the MEP program?
Well, certainly the MEP program is a program that is currently authorized that reaches down and touches small and mid-sized manufacturers. Right now, we are undergoing a reshuffling of the deck, if you will, in the MEP program to try to do a better job of right-sizing the funding for the individual centers to the manufacturing ecosystem that they sit in. Initially, for most of the MEP grants were made more than 10 years ago. The world has changed a lot in the last 10 years, so we are right now trying to, we've just completed the recompetition for 10 centers. We'll do an additional, at least 10 states. We will do an additional 12 this year to try to make sure we can make sure that the federal contribution to the state is congruent with the needs of that particular manufacturing community.
It's a very important program. I've seen it working on the ground at some of our businesses, so thank you for your work on that. My time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mm-hmm.
I now recognize Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the panelists for being here today. I am extremely lucky to represent the 5th District of Massachusetts, which is really a center of life sciences, biotech, and it is not only an economic engine for Massachusetts and for the country, but it is also, as a very personal effect on the research that you do and sponsor. As I heard one dad say, a rare disease is only rare until it affects your child. And the differences that you are making, not only in jobs and the economy in Massachusetts and across this country, but also in the real effect on people's lives. And people do not come to my district for the weather. In fact, when Dr. Cordova was welcoming back my colleague from Antarctica, I thought you had mixed us up. But but I am concerned. They come to Boston because we have incredible universities and we have incredible institutions doing research. That's why they come, and that's why keeping that innovation pipeline is so critical. But there is cynicism and there is criticism of much of the work that you're doing. And so I'm very interested if any of you can tell me a little bit more about the STAR Metrics program and how you are proceeding in being able to put real dollars and really track the impact of the investment in research that is going forward.
Mm-hmm. Should I start?
Sure.
All right. Thank you very much. And actually, my first experience as a graduate student, my first field trip from California was to one of your great institutions, to the Harvard Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory to do some research, satellite research. So NSF really cares about the evaluation of its programs, especially in the STEM area that you're referring to. We lead the STAR metrics, and STAR stands for Science and Technology for America's Reinvestment, measuring the effects of research on innovation, competitiveness, and science. It's a federal and research institution collaboration, as you know, Representative Clark, to create a repository of data and tools that will be useful to assess the impact of federal R&D investments. So we're very heavily engaged in that. In addition, our Directorate of Education and Human Resources invests in foundational research in evaluation through a program we call PRIME, which stands for Promoting Research and Innovation in Methodologies for Evaluation Program. It encourages the community to develop new evaluation methodologies, adapt methods that are successful in other disciplines, and expand the workforce with the capacity to conduct evaluation. In addition, we have an evaluation and monitoring group, which has a 5-year evaluation monitoring plan for everything we do. So we do take evaluation and educational research very seriously. In fact, when you see the 11% increase in the EHR, Education and Human Resources Directorate, it is mainly for an increase in undergraduate education and in what you're talking about in educational research, which includes evaluation and monitoring.
Thank you very much. And Dr. May, back to our historic snowfall, I wonder if you could discuss the progress around the disaster resilience framework that Nist is developing and other efforts that might be underway around disaster resilience.
Let's say that, well, Nist does not operate by itself in space.
Dr. May, will you hit your button, please?
Apologize. We don't operate alone in this space. I mean, we've heard some of the things that NSF does. Even within the Department of Commerce, there are equities in NOAA, since they predict the weather, and they look at the coastal environment, the Economic Development Agency, the Minority Business and Development Agency. So we're all working together. But the unique thing that NIST does is sort of looks at what our science and engineering investigations can do to influence regulations and codes that might support the built environment. And speaking to recent activities in your area of the country, we have not dispatched a team there yet, because one of the guidelines we have is that there is some new occurrence where we can glean things. So we don't go out like FEMA anytime there's an emergency. Our engagements are highly measured to go, but certainly what will happen and would happen is we would look at what changes are there in the climate or whatever that would warrant scientific investigations that might need to have changes in the building codes and so forth to better protect the built environment.
Great. Thank you. I see my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, I recognize Ranking Member Lipinski for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I know we have a hard stop, so we can't ask any more questions. I just wanted to thank you all for being here. One thing I was going to address, but we've talked a lot about I-Corps. I'm very happy to see the strong support, strong number for I-Corps in the budget. Everyone knows I've been the biggest supporter of that, and great to see that it's very successful. And Dr. May, I'm going to submit a question for the record about Nist activities concerning spectrum sharing also. But thank you all again very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and written questions from the members. The witnesses are excused, and this hearing is adjourned.